They thought the desert was empty until it spoke back, because in the winter of 1991, as the Gulf War pushed deeper into silence and smoke, a small U.S. reconnaissance unit crossed a stretch of Iraqi desert that maps labeled as dead ground. A place with no structures, no tunnels, no strategic value. Yet the sand felt wrong under their boots, damp and heavy despite months without rain, and when they halted under a moonless sky to dig shallow foxholes, the night itself seemed to lean closer. Every scrape of metal against sand sounding too loud, until one soldier froze mid-dig. His breath caught in his throat as he swore he heard whispering beneath him, dismissed at first as fatigue until another soldier heard it too. Then another, the whispers turning into muffled voices, coughing, muttering, crying in pain, clearly human and clearly coming from directly below their feet. And as fear tightened the air, the voices began to shift, overlapping in strange rhythms, sometimes Arabic, sometimes broken English, sometimes speaking names that made grown men flinch, because the desert should not know names. And when one voice calmly whispered, "Don't dig any deeper," the unit leader ordered total silence. Weapons raised, hearts pounding, realizing with sick certainty that whatever lay beneath the Iraqi desert was not simply buried by war but awakened by it. Listening, waiting, and slowly finding its way to the surface through sound alone. By the second night, the voices were no longer subtle, because what had started as whispers beneath the sand grew into something deliberate, timed, almost intelligent, rising whenever the soldiers tried to rest and fading the moment they stood alert, as if whatever was below understood fear and fed on attention. And when command finally authorized engineers to investigate at first light, they uncovered a collapsed Iraqi bunker system buried far shallower than expected, its metal walls crushed inward by airstrikes, trapping enemy soldiers in darkness for days. And as hatches were cut open, the smell of rust, sweat, and decay poured out, followed by survivors dragged into the sun screaming and sobbing. Yet even as translators questioned them, something felt wrong, because the rescued men insisted others were still inside. Not soldiers, not human, shapes that moved in the tunnels without footsteps, voices that spoke inside their heads long before the bombs fell. And that night, after the bunker entrances were sealed for safety, the camp grew unnaturally quiet. No wind, no distant artillery, until the voices returned louder than before, no longer muffled by earth but echoing through the sand itself, calling soldiers by rank, by childhood nicknames, repeating private memories with perfect clarity, while radios hissed with fragments of speech that matched the whispers word for word, and ground-penetrating radar began showing impossible hollow spaces forming beneath the camp where no tunnels should exist, expanding slowly like lungs inhaling. And as one exhausted sentry broke down sobbing, claiming the desert was asking to be let out, the unit realized with creeping dread that the bunker had not been the source of the voices but merely a doorway, one the war had cracked open, allowing something far older and far more patient to remember the surface world again. By the third night, the voices stopped pretending to be human, because whatever had been hiding beneath the Iraqi desert no longer needed camouflage, and the sounds rising from the sand became layered and wrong, overlapping tones that bent language itself, voices too deep to belong to lungs and others impossibly thin, like whispers squeezed through cracks in stone. And the soldiers began to change under the pressure of constant listening, some growing withdrawn and staring at the ground for hours, others snapping violently at shadows, while a few claimed they could feel vibrations inside their bones whenever the desert spoke. And when one soldier fired into the sand screaming that something had grabbed his ankle from below, the bullet holes bled warm air instead of dust, exhaling a foul breath that carried murmurs with it, and ground sensors started registering rhythmic movement far beneath the surface, not tunneling but circling, as if something massive was repositioning itself, learning the boundaries of the camp. And then the voices learned how to command, issuing calm instructions in familiar voices, ordering men to remove helmets, to walk away from the perimeter, to lie down and listen. And one corporal obeyed before anyone could stop him, stepping into the dark beyond the floodlights and vanishing without a sound, leaving behind only shallow footprints that ended abruptly as if the sand had opened and closed again. And when command finally ordered immediate evacuation, the desert reacted, the ground shuddering in long waves while the voices rose together in a unified chorus, no longer whispering but chanting, repeating the same sentence over and over in perfect English. "You woke us up," until the soldiers fled, knowing with absolute certainty that the war had not uncovered an enemy position but disturbed something that had been buried on purpose, something that did not hunt with weapons, but with memory, sound, and time itself. The incident was officially erased within weeks, written off in classified reports as a collapsed bunker, psychological fatigue, and enemy deception. Yet the truth followed the surviving soldiers home, because even after Alpha Recon was quietly disbanded and the coordinates were permanently marked as restricted airspace, the men could not escape what they had heard, some waking every night at the same hour the desert had first spoken. Others reporting that silence itself now felt threatening, as if sound was the only thing keeping something buried, and one soldier left behind a journal filled with a single repeated line, written tighter and darker on every page. The desert remembers. Before he disappeared without explanation, while satellite images taken years later showed the area slowly sinking inward, not like erosion but like something beneath it was making room, breathing, settling deeper after being disturbed. And although no further excavations were ever approved, veterans of the Gulf War still trade quiet stories of nights when the wind over sand carries voices that do not belong to the living or the dead. Voices that do not beg or threaten but patiently remind anyone listening that what was awakened in 1991 was never destroyed, only acknowledged, and that beneath the Iraqi desert something still listens, waiting for the next war, the next vibration, the next careless step to remind it of the surface world and invite it to speak again.